Okay, so once again, welcome to Purpose of this Book with David G and David G, but we've got a very special David G, otherwise known as Page F, sitting in for one of the David G's 2 weeks in a row, alternating David G's, but Page 2 weeks in a row. So thank you so much, Page, for helping out again, sitting in. So last week, David and Page wrapped up the fear inventory in the 4-step on page 68, concluding with at once we commence to outgrow fear. So we are going to get into the bottom paragraph of 68, but I don't know, before we do, Paige, do you want to recap anything from last week? Summary thoughts, a minute or two on fear inventory?
I so appreciate the opportunity. I wouldn't say necessarily a perfect summary, but what I found with the process of inventory is there's this beautiful natural flow that's going to roll us right into our sex inventory. And so you guys can let me know if this is your experience. But I don't know about you, but I had a couple of my exes, just a few, on my resentments. I'm sure you guys have only ever had very amicable breakups, but for somebody like me, I put all those stupid jerks on my resentment inventory. And then you know what I found out? Oh, I was the jerk. And I'm sure I'm the only one who has ever had any fear of sex, relationships, intimacy. Those things are different. Any fear around being alone, being single, all of these fears of looking at this type of inventory. And what a beautiful natural progression to go through that leads us right into this sexual relationship conduct inventory. So it's just a beautiful progression that I've seen as the result of continued and much needed inventory. So thank you for the opportunity to do
Thanks,
that.
Paige. And I just want to, for anybody who was here last week, or if you weren't, certainly go and listen because David and Paige did a bang up job. One of the, I think the really nice things about having Paige sit in a couple of times with us is having Paige and her experience and perspective underscores a really important point that David and I have been talking about through this inventory process. That, like last week, Paige showed the 2-column fear inventory that David and I use, but then Paige shared her 4-column fear inventory that she uses with the people that she step guides and sponsors. The question is, which is right? Neither. Which is wrong? Neither. Nothing counted but thoroughness and honesty. That's the only condition to know if I'm doing my 4-step correctly. And really, those are the only qualifiers to evaluate, am I working my program of recovery correctly? Am I thorough? Am I doing it all? Am I honest? Am I telling the truth? Omitting nothing? The format, the layout doesn't really matter if I can look at the content and say, it's all here, and I was telling the truth. Ultimately, that's all that matters, right? And so tonight, we're going to, as we get into sex inventory, we're going to have 2 different versions of worksheets again. We're going to have one that David and I use, and we're going to have one that Paige uses. And we're going to celebrate the fact that we've got options to achieve the same ends. Okay. So let us jump in. Bottom paragraph of 638. So it's full paragraph 1, 2, 3, 4. Now about sex. Many of us needed an overhauling there. But above all, we tried to be sensible on this question. It's so easy to get way off the track. Here we find human opinions running to extremes, absurd extremes perhaps. One set of voices cry that sex is a lust of our lower nature, a base necessity of procreation. Then we have the voices who cry for sex and more sex, who bewail the institution of marriage, who think that most of the troubles of the race are traceable to sex causes. They think that we do not have enough of it, or that it isn't the right kind. They see its significance everywhere. One school would allow man no flavor for his fare, and the other would have us all on a straight pepper diet. We want to stay out of this controversy. We do not want to be the arbiter of anyone's sex conduct. We all have sex problems. We'd hardly be human if we didn't. What can we do about them? Go ahead,
I
Abby.
have the definition for arbiter, which is any person having absolute power to judge and decide. So in this sentence, we do not want to be the judge of anyone's sex conduct.
Thanks, Abby. Go ahead, Paige, kick us off.
Oh, yep, sorry, not, I forget the thumbs up method. It's a seamless thing, and then you invite me, and I'm like, what do I do with my hands? All right, and Scott put it in the chat. Now, I'm just gonna take us on a very slight tangent, because it's funny, and because, here's the thing, why are we looking at sex? Because as soon as we get to this part of the book in the meeting, there's that like, ugh, there's that awkward, there's that uncomfortable, there's that like, oh, who's going to read that kind of giggles. And that's why we got to have a look at this, because this is the stuff that really has the greatest capacity to harm others, to block ourselves from the connection that we have with our higher power. But it's also important to lighten the mood a little. So there's this joke, and it's like, have you ever heard about the confused sponsee? So there is this wonderful, well-meaning sponsee who is absolutely fallen in love. The blue of her grippy socks matches the blue of his eyes. It's meant to be. Maybe you guys have healthier relationships. Tell me about that. And the sponsee wants to do the right thing, wants to, do like stay sober. I mean, they both left treatment together, but they want to do it. I'm sure this is not ringing any bells for some of you. So the confused sponsee goes to his sponsor and is like, okay, I'm going to get into a relationship. And the sponsor's like, oh boy. And here's what I'd like you to do. I'd like you to go home and read page 69, because most of the directions are on page 69. And the confused sponsee says, absolutely, I'm going to be a good sponsee. Thank you, sponsor. Off I go. And on his way home, right, 69, 69, 60. Oh, I got to take a left over. 96? 96? Is that the page I was supposed to go to? And so let's pop over to page 96. Confused sponsee, first paragraph. Now keep in mind the lens. Okay, this is about my relationships. All right. Do not be discouraged if your prospect does not respond at once. Search out another alcoholic and try again. You are sure to find someone desperate enough to accept with eagerness what you offer. So sometimes, like when I work with sponsees, I like to go line by line, and sometimes that's to help avoid the confused sponsee, but I like to make that joke. And as we get back to page 68, it talks about many of us needed an overhauling there. And what I want to share is that if we're coming to this study today, if we're new, if we've been around for a long time, and this is an area of our life that, man, we feel guilt and shame, and we have all those secrets, and it's like, this is an area of my life that needs an overhauling. You're not alone. You're not alone. Really, that's what this paragraph is starting to get us to see, is that our human experiences are just that human. But this is an area that carries guilt and shame. And listen, if drunks didn't have a problem with it, they wouldn't waste time and money putting it in the book. So if you're like, I got struggles in this area, what we're going to see is so does all of us. And what I love is this is a book that was published in 1939, written in 37, 38 by middle-aged white dudes in the 1930s. And they're not taking that whole, it's bad. They're actually taking an incredibly open stance, which is, hey, let's not be crazy over here. You know what I mean? We have human opinions running to extremes. So we go from one extreme to the other. And one is like, ew, gross, it's bad, feel bad, be guilty. That's what, no flavor for his fare means. The other is straight pepper diet, which is like all of it, all the time, more than once, like go crazy. And it's like, hey, that's not helpful. Let's find that God-centered middle ground. Let's find that God-centered path for our lives. And as Abby read out the definition of arbiter, we're not here to judge, moralize, condemn, or control. We are here to let God guide us in this very important area of our life. And I think it's so important that it says we all have sex problems, all of us. We'd hardly be human if we didn't. So again, the thing that we're looking at is a struggle that is part of the human experience, that is not limited to drunks. And if we're feeling like we're struggling or we're in shame, you are not alone. And we got to have a look at it. I'm doing the thumbs up, so it's a
Mm.
natural, seamless transition back to you.
Thank you for announcing the natural seamless transition. Okay, so so thanks for getting us started on this page. And so this is, part of the book, and as we're talking about the third inventory here in the fourth step, we had the resentment inventory, and then we moved on to fear, and now we're into sex conduct or sex harms. And this inventory is a little bit different than the first couple, right? And really, it's an early bridge to what we're going to be doing shortly hereafter in 8 and 9. So, if you think about our resentment inventory, we had those first 3 columns was all about my perspective. Those first 3 columns are pretty easy to most of us once we get going. I'm angry at you. This is what you did to me, and this is how it affected me. Then I really start to get spiritually awakened to the reality of my life to this point when I'm able to honestly and thoroughly fill out that 4th column. And then as we get into fears, it's looking at what are the things that I'm afraid of. And Paige made a really important differentiation on this last week as well. Like, yeah, listen, if you're afraid of heights, you're afraid of spiders and snakes, throw that on there too. But what we're really driving at in the fear inventory is self-centered fears, right? How has the failure of self-reliance turned into what makes me a frightened little boy full of fear, right? So this is all about sort of me and my awakening to how I've been looking at things. This sex inventory, this is really about my conduct, right? It's a little bit akin to that 4th column of resentment, but this is a little bit more matter of fact here. What did I specifically do? We're going to see as we get into this. How did I act? What did I say? What did I do physically? How did I torture someone emotionally? What was my conduct, my behavior? And as we get into the 8th step, right? Sneak preview, a little bit forward here, just fast forwarding a bit, where I'm going to make a list of all the persons I had harmed. I'm going to go back to my resentment inventory and say, okay, well, I see what I did. I formed these resentments and I did some stuff. I harmed some people. And yet, out of fear, I harmed some people. But my sex conduct is going to be pretty black and white about where I was wrong. And Bill here, in his first paragraph, he is really implying our relationships with people as it relates to physical sexual relationships on the surface. Okay. But this inventory is about more than that. I typically classify the content here as certainly sexual, but also intimate, interpersonal relationships. I can't say, between genders, because we all have different orientations and things. So, this could be romantic between men and women, men and men, women and women. Could be someone I was married to. Could be someone that I had dated. Could be someone I only knew on the internet. Could be someone with whom I have never even said a word, never even shook their hand, right? Pornography, issues, fantasy, right? Remember, fancied or real, everything makes it onto our inventory. It's not just going back through the people that I dated, not just going back through the people I cheated on. Who were the people that had these intimate relationships with, whether sexual or not, right? I mean, Bill's using this a little bit of catch-all. Now, listen, at a sponsee asked me one time, well, should I talk about my relationship with my mom here? And I said, I am fairly certain that should not go on the sex inventory, okay? Not in most traditional families anyway. So this is not every relationship. These are the things that we had, these sort of meaningful, intimate, physical or not physical, sexual or not sexual, interpersonal, intimate relationships, right? Fancied or real. And the thing that Bill is trying to educate us on here is, and he does a nice job of this so frequently, like he rolls us towards ideas. He starts to move us towards the activity we're going to take. And he's saying, listen, this is going to be a tough subject. First of all, he's saying Many of us needed an overhauling there, and Bill's being generous. All of us need an overhauling here, right? I don't care. I sponsored a guy and he was in his 30s, like, I've never had sex with a woman. I said, great, perfect content for the sex inventory, right? How was your conduct around this? We got into it and there was internet stuff and all this. It didn't matter that he had never consummated an act with a woman. Not relevant, right? So all of us needed an overhauling here in every part of our sexual lives, but we had to be sensible. So Bill's saying it doesn't matter where on the spectrum we think we are, you know, whether we're wild and kinky and we do all this crazy stuff, or whether we have all these conservative values, wherever we're on the spectrum or wherever we've been on the spectrum, it's all relevant and it's all fodder for the inventory. Right. And then he's sort of back selling to explain this a little bit more, but the kicker is towards the end of the first paragraph where he's saying, because we're all along this spectrum, doesn't really matter where we are. We just have to understand we're going to stay out of the controversy of judging our behavior or anybody else's. We're not going to be the arbiter. We're not going to be the judge of anyone's conduct. We all have sex problems. Here, Bill's being more definitive. Earlier, he said many of us needed an overhauling there. And then not even a full paragraph later, he's just saying, look, we all have sex problems, right? I just need to accept this as black and white. We'd hardly be human if we didn't. What can we do about them? Well, here's what we're going to do about them is we're going to learn. First, we're going to look at all that. We're going to find facts. We're going to face facts. And then we're going to get into praying for a healthy new sex ideal. And what does healthy mean? I don't know. Paige doesn't know. Our ICU nurse, Ashton, doesn't know. This, we're going to sort out healthy between me and my higher power. I may still be wild and kinky. Okay. If that's what works for me and God says, David, it's okay. Here's an appropriate and healthy way to go about it. Okay. We can all be wherever we end up as long as I don't evaluate and discern that on my own. I got to figure this out with God. Double back or no? Move on? Okay. Okay. First full paragraph on 69. Okay, so now we're going to get into some instructions. So we'll cover this paragraph and then maybe we can start showing those worksheets, Paige. Here's what we do. We reviewed our own conduct over the years past. Hold on, let me read that again with more inflection. We reviewed our own conduct over the years past. Where had we been? Here's the list: selfish, dishonest, or inconsiderate. Whom had we hurt? Did we unjustifiably arouse jealousy, suspicion, or bitterness? Where were we at fault? What should we have done instead? Woof. We got this all down on paper and looked at it.
Okay, I have a couple. I wanted to look up selfish, dishonest, and inconsiderate.
Wonderful.
We went over those in resentments, but selfish is taking care of one's own comfort, advantage without regard for interest of others. Dishonest is marked by fraud, lacking honesty, not trustworthy. Inconsiderate is not duly respecting the rights and feelings of others, thoughtless. And then I have unjustifiably, which is without cause or reason.
Thank you. I thumbs up all the time when I'm listening to people. So I just like, yeah. If you want, I can screen share how I do it and approach that.
Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead,
Sweet.
Please.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. So, I'm going to do it like this because I learned how to do this. And this is just.
Oh, wow. That's
yeah.
advanced. Holy cow.
It's not. It's really just a slightly extra button. Don't think this is, I don't do nothing fancy. All right. So the columns that I use are going to be essentially the same that David and David use, but slightly in a slightly different order. And where I get that first column is from that line, whom had we hurt? So we're no longer looking at, like we were talking about, this is no longer the blame game. You'll notice in the second column, we don't have a, hey, wait a minute, what did they do to us? No, it's all about our conduct, our mistakes, the harms that we have caused. Now, here's my experience with working with sponsees from the variety of the human experience. What I will say is invariably, they will be like, hey, do I have to put it down? Like, what do I, like that same question that David was talking about, where it's like, yeah, let's have a look. And not a Puritan sort of like look, but let's have a look at how we engage with porn. Let's have a look if we engage with sex work. Let's have a look at that. Let's have a look at, I'm sure no one here has ever flirted with somebody to get them to buy them drinks or slept with people for money, worth, validation, drugs, alcohol. Let's have a look at it. And not taking that sort of black and white view, but to see where is God calling us. Now, when people are like, who should go in column 1 or not, I look to that next paragraph where it says we subjected each relation to this test. Was it selfish or not? If it is selfish, I write it down. And if I have alcoholism or addiction, most of my relationships were based in my selfishness. And invariably, I will have a sponsee that says, what if we were both selfish and we were having a selfish time together? Well, then we were selfish, so we write it down. And then what I like to do is get into where were we at fault. So I like going one column at a time. So doing all of column 1 and then all of column 2, then so on. When I get into where we were at fault, what I'm looking for is a lot like that 4th column of resentments, how I write them out, where I'm looking at, where I caused harm. I'm sure no one here knows what it's like to be codependent and make other people God. And I'm sure nobody can relate to that idea of, this is the second time I made this joke today. You know how alcoholics and addicts, we don't date. We just show up on the second date with our garbage bags, 2 garbage bags full of stuff in their driveways. That's how you tell the addicts on the second date, because we got kicked out of treatment. So we're writing like, where did I cause harm? Did I try to fix, control, judge? Did I cheat? Was I unfaithful? Was I using them? And I can use them for money, for sex, for power, for worth, for validation, for a sense of comfort. I'm really wanting to dive in and explore the harms that I have caused. And I love to work 2 and 3, in this case, together a little bit. Because in the 3rd column, I put selfish, dishonest, and inconsiderate. And I notice that it doesn't say, had we been, but it says, where had we been? And if I can dive in and look for, where was I showing up with selfishness in this relationship? Where was I showing up with dishonesty in this relationship? Now, I want to point out that dishonesty is not just infidelity. That dishonesty can be not saying that hard thing, not communicating. That thing when you're like, oh, I need to say something about this, but I'm just going to push it deep inside and hope it goes away. That's dishonesty. The walls, the masks, that presenting to be somebody that I'm not so I can get into a relationship, that's dishonesty. Maybe I had dishonest motives. I want to dive in. Where was I inconsiderate? Really looking at my inconsideration, my thoughtlessness. And then it goes on to say, did we unjustifiably, which is that idea of like, hey, I caused this completely unfairly, arouse jealousy, suspicion, or bitterness. And there's different ways in which I can arouse jealousy, suspicion, or bitterness. If I cheat on my spouse, that would arouse jealousy, suspicion, or bitterness in them. And here's the thing. Oftentimes when people have been unfaithful, they will ask, and it's a fair enough question, if my spouse or partner or this person did not know, should I write that down? And I always like to take the lens of, if they would know, would they feel these things? If so, write it down. I can also arouse bitterness by continuing to behave in ways that are harmful in the relationship. If I'm not listening to my partner, if my partner is repeatedly telling me something is important to them and I continue to ignore it, that would create bitterness. I can also engage with somebody who is already in a relationship, and that would create jealousy, suspicion, or bitterness in that other third person. If we're looking at behaviors like pornography, again, not taking a black and white, good or bad sort of view, but if I'm in a relationship and I'm giving time and energy and attention to that instead of my partner, is it possible that that could create jealousy and suspicion? Not black and white, but just to consider. And that's where these things can, 2 and 3 can work together. If I'm feeling a little stumped on where I was at fault, I can also go back to my resentments in my 4th column and I can pull from there. But selfish, dishonest, and considerate, arousing jealousy, suspicion, or bitterness can also go. Now, also, I can arouse jealousy, suspicion, and bitterness in myself by being an incredibly insecure human being, by making that person God. And perhaps oftentimes there's a pattern of, if we've been unfaithful, we project that they will be unfaithful. And that could create that jealousy, suspicion, or bitterness. Now, I love throwing in these prayers in between column 3 and column 4. If you've seen any of the sheets that I made, that's the vibe. I'm like, we're going to pray before we get into that 4th column. And I take that prayer from that next paragraph. We ask God to mold our ideals and help us to live up to them. And as I get into that 4th column, what should I have done instead? What I like to do is I like to flip it, because it can be really easy to write, I should have been nowhere near them. That's fair. But if I stop there, I really miss the depth of understanding that I can glean from this inventory. If I should have been nowhere near them, and I was engaging in a relationship when the flags were red, I thought it was a carnival. You know, red flags just look like flags if you're wearing rose-colored glasses. If I was doing that, like, what should I have done instead? Well, a lot of that means I was probably looking to that person to fix me, to fill the void. And where do I need to turn? I need to turn to God to fill that void. If we dove into relationships too quickly, you know, with 3 days together, we already got a cat. You know what I mean? If we're doing that, what do I need to do? I need to build love and trust and connection slowly over time. If I've been dishonest, I need to be honest. If I've been selfish, I need to be selfless. If I've been inconsiderate, I need to be considerate. If there has been infidelity, or if I was engaged with somebody who is not emotionally stable, not spiritually well, a common thing that I find in working with others and helping them with sex ideal work and 4th column work with sex inventory is all parties need to be physically, spiritually, and emotionally available to be in a relationship. If I'm with somebody else and it's a closed relationship, I'm not available. If they're brand spanking new or haven't just got out of a relationship, man, they might not be emotionally or spiritually available. If I've been codependent, I need to be God dependent. If I was an incredibly selfish, inconsiderate alcoholic, I need to be sober. And how I'm sober is working these 12 steps as a way of life. And if I really dive into that 4th column for me is where I get that sex ideal, those regular patterns of behavior of what should I have done instead. And I'll talk a little bit more about when we get there, about what I do with the sex ideal and how I work that sex ideal. But for me, that 4th column just makes so much sense about where that sex ideal comes from. So I'll leave it there. And I'll leave it there. Thumbs up, stop the share. Would you like me to screen share your columns?
Sure.
Great. I won't put me in the middle of it though.
Okay. Yeah, you're gonna have to show me how to do that. I don't know how to do that cool thing.
Boom.
Okay, so Paige was talking about essentially the same content laid out a little differently. Right. And so just like I said at the top of the call, doesn't really matter. Thoroughness and honesty is what we're shooting for here. And the reason why we laid it out this way, it's originally when we first started using worksheets, you know, David and I collectively in our study group and with some people we were taking through the steps, we took them from Joe and Charlie, right? That's the gold standard. But as we looked at them, we thought they were, for people going through the steps a first time, it could be even simpler, because one of the brilliant things that Joe and Charlie did in the inventory is they connected the content of the big book and the 12 and 12. But if I'm taking somebody through the steps for the first time, personally, I'm only coming out of the big book. And so I'm trying to keep it just as close as possible to the book. Again, not saying it's right. It's just, those of you who come every week, you hear me talking about the mechanics of doing the step work. And I believe that working the mechanics enough with enough feeling, that produces the miracles, right? So the mechanical approach that I espouse is, you know, just to try to follow the language here. But it's certainly, it can be a little confusing that I've got whom did I hurt in the second column, right? Especially if we go one column at a time. But You know, this is just how we got it laid out. But it's the same questions that are in the book that Paige just covered. Starts with asking where had I been selfish, dishonest, and inconsiderate, and then moves into whom did I hurt. I had a real lesson 3-4 years ago. I was sponsoring a woman named Jamie, and she was working on her sex conduct. And she said, "What about the kids of the person I was involved with?" And I was like, "No, they don't go on there." And then I paused and I was like, wait a minute. Collateral damage here, guys. Sure, I was in the relationship with this woman or this man, but what about their kids? What about their parents, right? All these other people related that I was involved with, that because of my conduct, my actions, I didn't just hurt that one person. I hurt a bunch of people with my behavior, right? So my selfishness, my dishonesty, my inconsiderate behavior, and as Paige pointed out, the book doesn't say, hey, had I been, but it wants to know specifically where. So I like the check boxes because it just is like a little placeholder that says, hey, dude, you're going to have to come back and now explain this, talk about the where, because I like to forget quickly. So I'm like, oh, yeah, I better remember where I'd been selfish. Oh, yeah, I am dishonest and inconsiderate. Who did I hurt? Who are all the people in this one scenario that I hurt? And did I unjustifiably arouse jealousy, suspicion, bitterness? Where was I at fault? Right? Where did I go wrong? And then what should I have done instead? Holy cow. The where was I at fault? I'm going to stick to the same rule we put in place in the resentment inventory. Maximum of 19 words, 20 words. Don't write a novel. Please don't start with, well, let me, because I'm like, no, I don't want the backstory. I don't need the backstory. Where was I at fault is pretty simple. I cheated on this person. I ghosted this person. I manipulated them by making promises. I pouted when I couldn't have sex, or I used sex as manipulation or a weapon, whatever. These things are very cut and dry, right? The whole telenovela, not relevant. And when I put those faults down, in my experience, the what should I have done instead is fairly clear. Now, I think Paige started to intimate a little bit another level of this that we're going to get into a little bit more. The what should I have done instead is like that springboard to how I create my new ideal. And so as I'm filling out the inventory the first time, I'm probably not going to fully understand what should I have done instead, but there's going to be some softballs to bash out of the park. If I cheated, maybe I shouldn't have cheated. Or if I cheated, maybe I shouldn't have said I was in this relationship. Like there's a lot of very black and white stuff here. And is the goal of this to have a mini session of psychoanalysis as to my sexual problems, my hangups, and my Oedipal complex and everything like that? Hell to the no. That is what we go to therapy for. That is why we seek help beyond recovery if we need it. Okay? Don't turn this into self-psychoanalysis. Okay, we're not Freud's or Jung's here. And please don't ask your sponsor to be a psychoanalyst for you as you go through this either. Even if by trade they are, that's not their job in this situation, right? Conduct, mechanics, what did I do? What should I have done instead? And this is how we start to form this. And furthermore, where's Paul? Paul, you want me to bring this up as a topic? Is that cool? That little note you sent me? Because I think it's a good question to pose to the group. So Paul said, and it's probably a little language thing here, so maybe we can get a definition, Abby, and then Paige, we can workshop this a little bit. Paul said, I find it interesting that the book says, did we unjustifiably arouse jealousy, suspicion, or bitterness? If we cheat on our partner, their jealousy, suspicion, etc., is justified. So I think the question is here, and let's get a definition of unjustifiable or unjustified, please, Abby. So I think the question is here, aren't all of my actions, if they are wrong, justifiable to the other person if I arouse jealousy, suspicion, or bitterness? And I think if we're looking at the language that way, it's kind of hard to argue, right? I screwed up. This person's upset with me. That seems justified. I believe the intent of how this is written, at least this is how I've always interpreted the language, happy to be corrected here, is that did I behave inappropriately? Is there a way in which I acted that I can't justify, to use that word, that then caused this result? So the difference here, I think, is how the word is being used, or the two-word phrase about unjustifiably arousing. Yes, I could arouse jealousy, suspicion, or bitterness by running around or having secret texts or phone calls. But the question is, did I do something sort of abhorrent in my behavior to cause this? I think that's the distinction. And I'm not sure I'm doing it. I may have to circle back and think about better words around this, but that's my first stab at it. Abby, you have anything yet? We can circle back. Yeah.
I have unjustifiably, which is without cause or reason. I'm looking up justifiably, so we can get like either
So
or.
did we, without cause or reason, arouse jealousy, suspicion, or bitterness? Paige, you want to take a stab?
Absolutely. And I'm just gonna do my own sort of, like, Abby's gonna get an accurate, real, important definition. I'm gonna just make up my own etymology.
Please.
So just know that that's happening. So we talk about unjustifiably. The root of justified would be pertain to justice. And so what I'm seeing is, did I create an injustice to create this harm? Now, again, I'm taking some linguistic leaps, but it's that idea of, like, absolutely, was basically, did I unfairly, that might be a good synonym, did I unfairly create jealousy, suspicion, or bitterness? And if I cheated on a partner, I unfairly created that in them. Or if I was engaged romantically or sexually with somebody who is in a relationship, I unfairly created that in the other person. And if I have made you God in my life, and I'm trying to control you so you don't leave me, and I'm so afraid you're going to cheat on me that I'm searching your phone and doing this, and you haven't cheated on me, I've unfairly. So I'm taking more that lens of, like, unfair, rooted in justice. And you don't have to look up the etymological origins. I'm just going to do that on my own later because I'm fun. But if you want to, Abby, you can, no pressure.
Yeah, I think part of this is we try to deconstruct the word, as Paige is doing here. Is like, what if we looked at this? The question is this: did we justifiably arouse jealousy, suspicion, or bitterness? So how would I justifiably arouse this? Let's say in someone that I was in a relationship with. Well, I justifiably aroused them because I said, there's better women than you out there. Or if you don't be a better partner to me, I'm going to find somebody, like, there's a lot of overt things that I can say that very justifiably is going to make somebody jealous, suspicious, and bitter. I might unjustifiably do this based on my motives and my mannerisms. And I think this is a little bit of what Paige was saying. Instead of being sort of purposeful and overt, I may be shady and coying and ploying, or I may even be saying to myself, hey, she knew that I was like a stud. She knew what she was getting into. She didn't think she could keep Ashton shaking head at me. She should have known better. I'm a man, I mean, these kinds of delusions or denials of behavior that I don't think is going to hurt anybody, right? And then I'm going to try to justify it to myself, but it's really not justifiable, right? Because I'm not being honest with me and I'm not being honest with them. Come up with anything else, Abby? Yeah.
Yes. So I do have justifiable referred me back to just. So I'm going to read that. Righteous and fair in action or judgment, impartial hints of punishment deserved or merited. And I also was looking at, and I think that's why he set up the questions, where had we been selfish, dishonest, and inconsiderate? And then he said, where did we unjustifiably arouse jealousy, suspicion, and bitterness? I think it's important to note, like, where were our motives selfish and self-seeking, and then where were our motives, like, maybe we didn't mean to, or maybe I was flirting with a girl and didn't realize it, and that hurt them. So I just thought it was important to note the order of those questions.
Good point.
There's something wrong with my brain because as you were looking up, I'm like, oh, that looks like fun. And so I happen to have, now I want to be very clear. I just have a 1930s dictionary and a 1930s medical dictionary. And you might be like, oh, is that because you're interested? No, I just have them because I'm fun. Just invite me over. I'm going to look up words. And I was just, as you were looking it up, I'm like, I just had this little inkling. I'm like, I'm gonna have a IRL Google, like I'm gonna look it up. And what I found was unjust. And it says not just, unfair, which, to be fair, I am biased to that definition that I found because that's the definition I made up, but it's in the dictionary that I have. So got excited, sorry. That's all.
So we got this all down on paper. So just recapping the last couple of sentences, where were we at fault? What are the things we did? What were the scenarios? What were the situations? What should we have done instead? And I'm not oversimplifying it, but as I said, a lot of them feels like the opposite of what I did is probably what I should have done. I know it goes deeper than that, but that's a good start. We got this all down on paper and looked it up. So again, on paper, not in our heads. We're not going to do a solitary self-appraisal here. We're going to put it on paper and we're going to talk it out with God and our sponsor, a step guide. And by the way, I mentioned that, I told that story about Jamie, who's a female that I used to sponsor, and he used to sponsor another woman named Heather for a long time. And, with my wife's okay, because she knows both of them very well, it was okay for me to sponsor them. We got to be sometimes careful, right, in cross-gender sponsorship or cross-orientation and stuff like this. But sometimes when I've told guys not so healthy that I sponsored women, he's like, oh yeah, what was that fifth step like? And I'm like, dude, have you completely missed the point of this, right? The content of the fifth step does not contain our sexual exploits. Nobody wants to hear any of that, right? One of the Ramers talks about, I'm going to have you read your fifth step to my grandmother, if that's what you think this is about. Right? I can listen to the fifth step of a straight man, a straight woman, a gay man, a gay woman, because the content of our conduct, it's not about our exploits. It's not about our conquests, it's all the stuff that's happening inside of us, just like everything else. It's the content of my head, my heart, my guts. It has nothing to do with my sex organs. Okay. If I'm writing about that, I said nothing counts but thoroughness or honesty to do it right. If I'm writing about my physical sex exploits, I'm doing it the wrong way. Okay. Carrying on, second paragraph on 69. In this way, we try to shape a sane and sound ideal for our future sex life. Now, I want to pause right here. So this is a really important point. And I know we talked about it in the resentments, but I want to go back because I think we look a little beyond this when we're getting through the steps for the first time. And I'm sort of a party to that, which is this. We're writing the inventory that's about everything that's happened to this point. Totally with you. But here we're being asked to consider what the future forward's going to be. Not just the inventory, what happened, but how I'm going to amend my behavior. We're talking about it right here in the fourth step, how I'm going to consider changing. Because here's the other thing. Back in the resentment inventory, if you want to back up to page 67, 66, is where we're starting to look at things, new paradigm, bottom of 66. This is our course. We realize that the people who run us were perhaps spiritually sick. So how did we look at people in the past differently, a new perspective, a new paradigm? Top of 67, though we did not like their symptoms and the way these disturbed us, they, like ourselves, were sick too. Now, future forward. This is not just about writing the inventory of the past. Now we're getting direction for what it's like beyond the fourth step. We ask God to help us show them the same tolerance, pity, and patience that we would cheerfully grant the sick friend. So in the future, a moment or more from now, when a person offended, we said to ourselves, this is a sick man. How can I be helpful to him? God save me from being angry. Thy will be done. Yes, inventory. Yes, realize the wrongs of it. Yes, start to think about the future immediately. We're not waiting until we're quote unquote done taking the steps. No. Immediately, I'm starting to pray to God to please fix the stuff in my head, my heart, my gut. And as I pray to God to please do those things I can't do for myself, I start to work my ass off on everything I can do to start to think and feel and behave differently, because God's not going to do it for me without my assistance. This is a two-man game. This is a two-being game. So back on 69, starting this moment, as I'm writing my sex inventory, and I look at it, because I put it all down on paper, I looked at it, it says, in this way, we tried to shape a sane and sound ideal for our future sex life. We subjected each relation to this test. Was it selfish or not? So each kind of row in the sheet. We asked God to mold our ideals and to help us live up to them. So again, difference between making a decision, acting on the decision. I can make the ideal. I better try to live by that ideal, but I need help from God to do that. We remembered always that our sex powers were God-given and therefore good, neither to be used lightly or selfishly, nor to be despised and loathed. And this goes right back to the sex spectrum. Right? There's no right or wrong, whether we're vanilla and conservative, and that's what makes us feel comfortable, or whether we're wild and crazy and kinky at the other end. It's all healthy if it's figured out in conjunction with God. The way that we approach sex, the way that we approach relationships and intimacy, that's all God-given. And when I am God conscious, and when I'm being an agent of God in my relationships with, by the way, so my wife is a child of God. God gives me the ability to be in this relationship with my wife. Let me tell you this, we met in recovery. I had about 3 years sober, and I think she had like 1 day longer than a year when I asked her out, right? I think I waited 366 days for her to be sober. Our intimate relationship as two early recovery people was very different then than it is now. We had a lot of sex and relationship ideal to individually and collectively pray to God and work on together, right? We grow over time with God, right? And it's a blessing when it happens, but it's all good. It's never bad. I love this, not to be used lightly, because we could really harm people. We just finished a whole inventory where I bet we harmed a lot of people, nor selfishly, which that's a wake-up call, because every one of my sex relations was based on selfishness or self-seeking. But also neither to be despised, right? So the things that I did don't make me ugly or bad, or neither to be loathed. I can see who I have been. That gives me the opportunity to be somebody different. That's the beauty of the final column in these inventories, that yes, this is me, but I get to grow. I get to have my spiritual awakening where everything in my head, my heart, my gut gets cast out and replaced by new principles that are going to guide me through life. Ab, anything from that paragraph? Sorry, I know it went out of order. I editorialized as I went along. Go ahead, Paige.
Awesome. All right. And, one of the things that I love about this paragraph is, it's what we're trying to do, the purpose of what we're trying to do. Now, I figure we might not get too far into the next paragraph, so I'm just going to borrow from that a little bit because I won't be here next week. But the whole purpose of, I'd be more patient. I know, I need a big book study ideal is what I'm learning. But the whole purpose of this inventory is to develop this sex ideal. Now, when I first got sober, there was this old timer, God love him, and he used to make this really inappropriate joke about the women with the big, round, brown eyes. And so I would be spiritually well and retort about the men with the real thick wallets. Just return serve that. But that's not what, in my experience, that sex ideal has very little, a little bit to do with the other person. Like maybe they shouldn't be from a certain treatment center in Calgary, Paige. But I wasn't well either. Don't think I was, anywho. But like, it's far more about me, who I am and who I need to be before, during, and after a relationship. David spoke about like, hey, ghosting isn't cool. I used to do that. That's not okay. I also, bear with me with this. It's going to sound weird, but I mean, most of the things I say are weird. It's a little like a resume. Do not print it off and send it in an application on Tinder or that sort of thing. What I mean when I say a sex ideal is meant to be like a resume, what I mean is that it's meant to be updated. The sex ideal that we have as a single person might not be the same sex ideal, won't be the same sex ideal. There will be overarching elements, but it won't be the same as when I'm in a relationship. And dating versus marriage, or dating versus 10 years, 20 years into a relationship, it will be different. And we're gonna, like, the whole purpose is to grow. Now, here's one of the things that I do with my sponsees. When I help them through the 4th step, I'm codependent, shocker. And so I sit with them and I take them through and like, I'm helping them. So when we get to the process of the 5th step, I know, you know what I mean? Like, I know all of it. I was there, you know, they do some of it on their own, but most of it I'm there for, and I was there. And so during the 5th step, I need to keep myself busy, you know, just, I need an activity. And so I'll write what I hear them say their defects of character are, but I also write what I hear them say their sex ideal is. And then I give it to them because I don't need it. But one of the things I realized is we talk about ideals, and we'll talk about that in the next paragraph. Whatever our ideal turns out to be, I've got to be willing to grow toward it. Now, in the chapter, We Agnostics, it talks about how, like, many of us had moral and philosophical convictions galore, but I can't live up to them, even though what I would have liked to. I have these morals and these values and these ideals for my life, and on my own power, I can't live up to them. So what I began to do was I began to take what the context of my sex ideal is and turn it into prayers. And then I can utilize those prayers on a daily basis. So again, if I am codependent, I need to be God dependent. God, help me to be fully dependent and reliant upon you. If I'm seeking my sense of value and worth and esteem and who I am from what I think people think of me, I've got to get that from God. God, I pray that from you, I would seek my sense of identity, worth, connection, companionship, security, and love, so that I can channel that to those who need it most. If I struggle with communication, I mean, I know it's a meeting full of like people that are absolutely no issue with communication and love to have hard conversations all the time. But if I struggle with that, God, help me to be honest and kind and loving, especially when it's hard. And that is how I begin to move in this, so that I can live up to that ideal. And it really brings God into that prayer life and into that area of my relationship. And yeah, it's helpful when things are going sideways in a marriage, or when there's a breakup, to inventory that relationship to help see what our ideal is now. And hopefully some of the things we're doing, you know what I mean? And it's like, then we grow. Where do I need to continue to grow? And one of the things, now I sometimes do this, is I just come up with stupid things from the big book. And all I'm saying is, when it talks about our sex powers were God-given, listen, if you're going to create like an AA 12-step sort of like band, welcome to the stage, our next performer, Sex Powers. Yeah. I turned on my actions just so I could do that, because I am an adult. So a lot of names for things if you're looking to name things. But yeah, I think that's all I want to say about that. Over to you, seamless transition.
Well, I'm going to just read this last paragraph, and I'll let you get in a couple more words on that before we wrap up. Bottom paragraph is 69, second to last paragraph, rather. Whatever our ideal turns out to be, we must be willing to grow toward it. We must be willing to make amends where we have done harm, provided that we do not bring about still more harm in doing so. In other words, oh my God, so important here, guys. We treat sex as we would any other problem. In meditation direction, we ask God what we should do about each specific matter. The right answer will come if we want it. Promise. Anything there, Abby? No? Go ahead, Paige.
I got the nonverbal cues that time, but the verbal cues were still helpful. Absolutely. And I love this paragraph because this little paragraph snuck right in the middle of sex where it's like, oh, I don't want to look at it, really encapsulates how we live this 12-step way of life. So we have an ideal that we are growing towards, striving towards, asking God to take us to. And if I have caused harm, I need to take the real, tangible action of amends. And that's what we do. And then it says, and of course, with the caveat, unless to do so would harm others.
Mm.
You know, but I love that it says we treat sex as we would any other problem. This is how we deal with problems, which it was brand new information. I thought we just charge through and fix it on our own. You know what I mean? No, this is how we deal with problems in meditation. And what that means is that I have that meditative practice. And it says we ask. And that is a prayer. Anytime in this book it says we ask or ask, what we're talking about is a prayer. So we already have the prayer, God, please mold my, and I say please because I'm Canadian. It's my terrible Canadian sensibilities. But God, please, you don't have to say please. God, mold my ideals and help me to live up to them. And now it says, God, what should I do about each specific matter? And here's the kicker. The right answer will come if we want it. It's a promise, but it's also a little bit of a warning because there's many times, I'm sure y'all super spiritual all the time, always willing to have a look at the dark corners of ourselves. Sometimes I don't want the right answer because it's not going to be what I want. You know what I mean? But if I want to truly see where God is meant to take me, it will come. And there's a man, that we got, we're right on the hour. I was going to go on a whole two-way prayer tangent. I will roll it back in, but two-way prayer, useful tool to kind of get some direction about that. And if we don't want it, we'll be blocked. So over to you, seamless transition, thumbs up, so natural.
On that note, we will adjourn for the evening. So one sec.